Hey everyone, welcome to my tuning quickie on adjusting your car's gearing for drifting. Now I apologize, I'm just getting over a cold here so I'll sound a bit congested, but this is a video I've wanted to make for a long time as it's a hotly requested topic. So let's start by talking about what the goals are and what you're trying to achieve when you adjust your car's gearing for drifting. Now the two things we're looking for are finding a proper power band and staying in that power band for as much of your drift run as possible. We'll start by talking about the optimal power band. What this means is you want to be sending enough power to the road to kick your tires out, but not too much so that your tires are just uselessly spinning and you're just smoke showing and going nowhere. And our second goal, trying to maintain that power band for as much of your drift run as possible, means that every drifting corner is different and you want to make sure there's an optimal gear for each one. So how do we solve these goals? Well, as usual in both real life and Forza, different people have different approaches to the problem. I'm going to mention 3 different solutions to the drift gearing problem in this video. So let's start with the first method, which isn't really much of a method at all, but I think it's the most common, which is either A, leaving the car stock, or making minor adjustments to either final drive or 1 or 2 drift gears. Now, the only reason I'm bringing up this method is because not only in Forza, but real life as well, transmission adjustment and tuning often comes last or never at all in a drift setup. So when you're drifting in Forza on mostly stock gear ratios, it is definitely more true to life, especially if you're into the more grassroots drifting style. In my own opinion, it's entirely valid to find the right gears in a stock gearing ratio instead of making your own custom gearing ratios, which are methods we'll start getting into right about now, starting with the Formula Drift method. You may have heard that some of the Formula Drift cars use a 4-speed Nascar transmission, and although that initially seems like a pretty weird choice for a drifting setup, there are a few very strong benefits for it. The fact that there's only 4 gears to play with means you have to do less shifting while you're driving, and it also means that each gear offers you a wider and more controllable amount of your power band. Most of drifting involves using only 2 or 3 optimal drifting gears, so having only a 4-speed transmission means that every gear can be useful for a different type of corner. I'm going to throw the real NASCAR transmission gear ratios up on the screen and you can copy them down onto your car if you'd like. Now obviously most cars come with more than 4 gears, so what you can do is copy down the first 4 gears like normal and take whatever gears you have left and either leave them alone or push them higher off the graph, which would mean a lower gear ratio, so that they essentially aren't used. Keep in mind with this method that although individual gear ratios don't change, the final drive will definitely need to be adjusted for your own car. Now a major reason for this transmission's recent popularity in Formula Drift is because it's reliable, simple to work on, and can handle loads of power. But neither of those things are necessarily relevant for Forza drifting. Luckily in Forza, our transmissions are never at risk of blowing up. And this leads us to one final drift gearing method, which is the one I use personally. So let's dive into this method by starting at the beginning and finding our optimal power band, as well as 1 or 2 base gears to build the rest of our tune off of. Alright, so I'm here at the top of Needle Climb with an S13, and this car has already been properly set up for drifting with the exception of it still having a completely stock transmission setup. So we're going to do a downhill run and see if we can try to find 1 or maybe 2 gears that fit within that nice power band range, and those will be the gears that we base the rest of our tune off of. So right off the bat, knowing that this is somewhat of a lower powered drift car in the grand scheme of things, I know my gear range is going to be probably somewhere between 2nd and 4th, and as I do this downhill run, pay attention to what gear I'm in and where I am in the rev range. You'll probably start to notice that while I'm in 2nd gear, I'm almost always bouncing off the rev limiter, and while 3rd gear is definitely a lot better, I'm very rarely bouncing off the rev limiter. I'm also struggling with not being quite high enough in my rev range sometimes to keep adrift. Another thing that you should notice is if I ever shift from 2nd into 3rd, it often just kills my drift and straightens me out. And that right there is the major problem that my drift gearing method tries to solve. Obviously, in real life, in the middle of a drift, it's pretty rare to shift. But in Forza, again, you don't risk breaking anything by upshifting in the middle of a drift, and it's not really quite as complicated as it would be in a real car. So in more standard gear ratios, when you try to upshift in the middle of your drift, the gear ratios are too far apart to keep your tires spinning fast enough to keep your drift going, and you end up just losing momentum and or straightening out. But with this gearing method, what you do is push your gear ratios much closer together so that you can control your rev range with much more accuracy by immediately shifting up or down to maintain that perfect power band balance of being right under your red line. So let's take a look at what to do here. You'll remember that my third gear was essentially my best drifting gear, but the ratio was just a little too low that I fell short on power for some corners. So I'm going to go ahead and bring that up, and then what I'm going to do is bring second, fourth, fifth, and sixth all very close to it in gear ratio. Now this does mean I sacrifice a lot of top speed and all of my gears are really short, but that's a good thing for drifting in this case because I can upshift 1 or 2 gears in the middle of a drift and it'll only drop my revs a small amount, which usually means that I can keep the drift going while upshifting in order to extend the length of the drift. So let's go ahead and do another downhill run and you can see more or less what that looks like. You'll notice right off the bat that I'm already switching between gears a lot more often than I was before. I'll go from fourth to third to second and back again, and that's because those gears are just much shorter and closer together, so I can find the perfect gear for the perfect part of the corner, and it just overall gives you much more control. If you're not used to drifting this way, and I do want to just kind of emphasize this again, this is not necessarily a standard method, and if you want to keep stock gearing or FD gearing, those are all totally valid. And I support and appreciate that, but I've just found that if you can figure this method out, and it does take a little bit of learning time if you're not used to shifting that much in the middle of your drifts, but if you can figure that out and just kind of give it a chance, it does offer a lot more control, and it ends up being really beneficial not only for solo runs, but also I've found huge for tandem runs, because again, having more control in the middle of a drift is hugely beneficial to being able to modify things, increase angle, decrease angle, kind of increase or decrease the length of the drift. Yeah, overall just gives you a lot more control. So what I showed you here was just a really quick gear tune on just one drift zone, although it is a pretty long drift zone with a lot of variety. But of course, there is a lot of fine-tuning room for this. You're going to want to have basically just one gear for every possible corner, and every time you find a new drift spot, you're probably going to make just slight little adjustments of like 0.01 or 0.02 differences in the gear ratio. So I would definitely recommend giving this method a shot. If you're looking for more top speed, just keep in mind you can always extend the gears or make slightly wider differences between the gear ratios. And as usual, if you have any questions, I'll try to be extra active in this comment section, partially because like I said, am getting over a cold, so my head's a little bit foggy and I might have just done a terrible job of explaining all of this. But also, this is a slightly more complicated topic in general. Gearing is pretty daunting, and I hope I helped with that somewhat, but either way, again, I'll be all over in the comment section if you guys have any questions. And with that said, that just about wraps it up for my tuning quickie on drift gearing. Now, I do have just one quick channel related question for you guys, and I think I'll throw up a poll here, but you can answer in the comments as well. I want to kind of add some extra layer of communication with you guys outside of just blabbing at the end of all my videos, in part so that I can actually just make the end of these videos shorter and cleaner without having to worry about kind of talking about channel stuff all the time. But also I think it would just be fun to kind of have a social media space where I could talk about the channel and share updates with it, or just go into some personal stuff that might be relevant to the channel. So again, the poll should be up on screen now. Just kind of vote for whatever is your favorite or whatever would be easiest, and I will get started on it pretty much whenever I hear back from you guys. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks everyone.